me about the students
And whether you'd
who
want
are
to lead this,
revolting against the school system.
and if you would lead such
They
a revolt.
won't, because the school system is heavily endowed by industry and the political world. And the students really may never go into dressmaking or what they call designing. What they want above all is a degree. Probably the parents will give them a prize.
But you teach at the,
But I teach dropouts.
because you feel the dropouts are the best students?
Yes, they're the ones who make good.
That's often
No,
the case.
I mean, if you say made good, I don't really know how to qualify it, because I see the sort of things that Miss McFadden makes, which look like sleepwear. And I don't see how that could be considered fashion. It's neither erotic, it has no finesse, it's just well publicized. As for Miss, is it Fürstenberg? That's for the birds. Everything that you could buy in a pattern book, you find in her line. The Ford one is worse. All the capital behind those houses amounts to an enormous bulk of money to make no statement of any sort, based on no conviction.
What about Halston?
Halston is a middle-of-the-road man who would be better as a buyer in a store or a stylist. He knows how to select good things to copy, but his passion has been to put his name on it, for which action the word plagiarism is correct.
In fact, I think many of your patents have turned up with his name on it.
Oh, yes. Yes. And that's because I had a contract with him to consult on shape and production and fit. His clothes had been returned by Marshall Field. It was falling apart, not fitting anybody, the first season. And he wanted me there, but he also wanted me because he'd spread the rumor that I stole my work from Brooklyn Museum, which would be really quite impossible to do. And he told me that it was Mr. Riley who told him that. Well, it is a matter of record. Mr. Riley stole my work from schools, buried it in the museum, and didn't return to Neiman Marcus for 14 years, a dress which I asked them to lend for the Chicago University show, and which remained all those years in Brooklyn Museum, was finally shipped to the FIT, where I discovered it in a box.
The Brooklyn Museum still has a great deal of your work, though, buried in
It
the
has the
basement.
biggest collection of any one man's work in the world,
How many dresses do they have?
180.
And are these properly cataloged and
No.
stored?
Mr. Riley never had time to do anything but dine with people and have cocktails with people. Never did any cataloging.
Well, would you like to get the dresses back?
Where would I put them?
Aren't other museums interested in acquiring that collection?
Not that size collection. I'd have to have a foundation.
To undertake the cataloging and the preservation and the
Exactly.
cleaning and the storing. So you just leave them.
And I've worked along the lines that the Frick brothers did in establishing that extraordinary collection of fossils. And the government, the Internal Revenue rather, published a full page stating the justification for the valuation put on fossils. And basically, the government said that if you found a fossil in an ash can, being therefore worth apparently nothing, if it were the fossil that fitted into a jigsaw puzzle as the missing piece, it would take on instantly the valuation of the total number of items divided into the total evaluation. And it also stated that the cost of the icebreakers, the offices that had to be kept on a yearly basis, the crew, salary, all that amounted to probably more than the valuation, which was $1.5 million. Without that being spent, without more than that being spent, there wouldn't have been one of the greatest fossil collections in the world. So it's a matter of the whole body of work together representing something.
Can the work be seen today as a student if I were to go and ask to see the patterns or ask to see the dresses?
Well, I thought so. The FIT, no, Brooklyn, no. But the FIT, which has a reasonably good collection of fine things, due to Mr. Riley visiting my past friends and saying that he was saving my work, the old story. Then he'd take it there, uncatalogued. The cataloging would consist of the date and the name of the giver, which is very good for tax, for fundraising purposes. You can apply to the person for a gift because you will have saved the money. They have a very interesting form of evaluation. Mr. Sigmund Rothschild, who has proclaimed himself the authority on my work, sets very high valuations, which are possibly correct, but he has no supporting material at all. And they don't use those valuations in the museum at the FIT. They have Mrs. Cora Ginsberg of the Ginsberg Levy firm that specializes in Queen Anne do the evaluations. And there are about a quarter of the ones given by Mr. Rothschild. Now, his are used for tax deduction.
What is the average evaluation of a dress by him?
$1,750 to $3,000. Now, Mrs. Ginsberg makes it $750. Now that's for insurance purposes.
And the Victorian Albert says it's $6,000.
Yeah, but for insurance purposes, it behooves a museum to have a low price, a low valuation.
To save on the cost of insurance.
Yes. But it seems to me very perverse to have two evaluations at the same time for one item.
How many dresses does FIT have?
About 14.
And that's a working collection that the students
Yes,
can visit and see.
but then one of the teachers from the University of the Virginia Commonwealth, a very nice boy, about 24, went there the other day and was told that he could only see my work if the university paid $300.
At Brooklyn?
Yeah. No, not at Brooklyn, at the FIT.
At FIT, isn't that? Why is that?
Well, it was an old idea of Mr. Riley and his boss, Mr. Lord of Gayley Lord and Burlington Mills, that people should pay to use the collections. But seeing isn't using. In any case, using is usually funded.
Who amassed the collection of dresses for the Brooklyn Museum? I mean, you just don't take 180 dresses out of one closet.
But I started by getting together a group of dresses made for Millicent Rogers, who was ill.
And who figured prominently in the latest museum show at the
Yeah.
Metropolitan.
And she couldn't wear her dresses, but she liked to order them. So I did what the French houses do. I gave her a clean copy, but I billed the dress for the museum. I billed the pattern so that when taxes were their highest, almost 90% or something like that, what she gave to the museum cost very little. since she didn't have to pay for what I gave her. It was a very good deal. And the big exhibition given in '47, a decade of design for Millicent Rogers, included all the patterns. And the patterns were, in a sense, more valuable than the dresses.
The pattern showing how the dress was made, how
Yeah,
it came to
not
be.
for somebody to copy it, but somebody to have a working basis of fit.
And of course, you've taken your own patterns and continue to evolve your new designs from them,
Yes, always.
feeling that something new
I've
comes
always
from something from the
made
past.
patterns in the same way that they make them in the wholesale market. I learned to do that years ago. So when something is completed of mine, it's ready for the production line. If there were a production line.
Well, you believe very strongly in the workroom and in background and training and cutting and
Yeah.
fitting and
And I don't believe
planning.
in two processes. In the market, they have a duplication process where they remake everything and use past parts, reassemble it, and the designer is sent away to the nearest bar. But I believe in eliminating the duplication process. It's very expensive. It uses the top salaries, the production man, pattern maker, grader. They're all in on it. They all stitch parts of the dress before assembling the whole. I feel all that work should be done while making the dress.
Are there still students interested in learning what you feel is the,
Oh,
or
yes.
what you know to be the correct couture method?
A great many.
And you teach some of them. I think you take on students through the University of Without Walls,
Yeah.
Pratt Institute.
Yes, it's now called the School of Integrative Studies. Now, I had a card from our friend Bill Cunningham the other day to say that whereas the birthday party wasn't all it should have been, the young students obviously looked up to me with much respect.
Well, you know that to be true, as many of them make a pilgrimage here to the Chelsea Hotel to talk to you, and that you yourself have gone and given lectures in the colleges.
Well, I do get letters from as far as Australia and Hawaii for material on my career. And it's curious that that material was supposed to be put together for the FIT, regardless of what I think of its curriculum. The library has wonderful facilities, and it's neutral ground. And when I said I would turn over my archives, provided they paid for their mobilization, they agreed and proposed to give me twice as much as I asked to lay out, not for myself, 10,000. Halfway through, with the material delivered, the gift, the grant, was rescinded. And it's curious that it was rescinded when Mr. Riley came back from vacation.
Do you think there's a conspiracy in the dressmaking world to hide you, to
Yes.
put you away?
Yes.
Aren't you really kind of the conscience of 7th Avenue, of the design business, and someone they want to sort of put away, sort of like a retarded child or something they're ashamed
No,
of
because
it
I
builds up
would
their
show
own
up
inadequacies?
their own ineptitudes.
Exactly.
That's not an unusual situation, you know.
How do you cope with that, Charles? I mean, how do you feel about this?
I don't know. I feel sometimes quite desperate. Other times I try to benumb myself, you know.
But through it all, where do you get the energy and the strength?
But I
to-
tell you a very curious thing. The half of the material which I did deliver was not compensated for by and to the FIT, has never been put in the library. Nobody knows where it is. Furthermore, 300 drawings, which the Ryersons of Chicago, who backed the symphony and also the family business with Inland Steel, they gave money to the Brooklyn Museum to buy these drawings. They've never been able to be found. it's generally thought that they must be Mr. Riley's care, so that he can have a wonderful show
And personal collection, even.
when I'm gone.
Well, let's not talk about that. The point is, with all this wrecked by the rich, hidden and not encouraged and not supported by the industry, you still have new ideas, Charles. You're still designing. You're still
Yes.
bursting with energy. And how do you do that? What's your secret?
But I have a mind that extrapolates. Give me one point and I'll reach another.
And just like a snowball, growing and going.
Yes.
And of course, through the years, it's not exactly that your work hasn't been tutored. I mean, you've had endless covers, endless articles. Your press clipping books go back to the 20s and right up
Yes.
to 1977.
Yes.
There has been an awful lot written about
Oh,
Charles
yes.
James. If
Yeah.
you go into the morgue of the New York Times or the Washington Post or any important paper here or abroad, you will find articles. And yet your name not known that much to the masses
No.
of people today.
It
Mostly
was,
the
though,
elite
one
museum
time.
world.
At the time when I did the Modest account, Young and Rubicam, experts in publicity, said my name was known to 3 million.
And it was Maxime Duffalez that you, who at the time was a model.
Yeah, a
And-
model and sort of a showroom girl at Schiaparelli.
In fact, it was you who paid her for her first trip to America.
Yeah, I paid the trip. I took her to Venice for Modest.
And she became really very famous in all those colorful Modest ads.
Oh, she thought it a good idea to take along Concorti, too. There was always somebody brought along. When she went up to Wadsworth, the Wadsworth Athenaeum in Hartford, she brought along an artist with whom she lived on Princess Street, I think, who is now affiliated with somebody else, to whom he's not married anymore than he was to her. She doesn't seem to be able to really stand on her own feet very much.
Do you still see her?
No.
There are a lot of, I think, current social ladies that, of course, that you knew for the past. Ruth Ford being another.
I wouldn't call Ruth Ford a social lady.
An actress.
She
I'd
was a
call her.
minor actress from a very small town in Mississippi. And she and her brother crashed New York, and she appeared in one of Orson Welles' plays, Mice and Men. And apparently her performance is good. As far as I can tell, her performance has got increasingly worse. She has a very piercing voice. And she tries to be overdramatic.
And you're a great friend of her brother's, too.
No, I'm not at all. I dislike him very much.
I didn't know that.
He poses as a poet, and I don't see that he's a poet at all. He once told me, Mrs. Esme O'Brien, the mother of Mrs. John Hammond, who's one of my early clients, that one did not read novels.
What did one do?
I don't know, read his poems, I think.
Well, when we were talking about fine artists that have influenced your work, we have to talk about Pavel Chalichev.
Yeah, well, after all, he was the friend of Henry Ford.
Who was
He-
Ruth's sister?
Charles Henry Ford owes everything he has to Chalichev. And Ruth Ford was paraded around London as a prospective fiancé of Edward James, who's no relation to me, who has a lot of money. And her mother was imported from Mississippi and given a black tweed suit and an evening dress. And I think Ruth had about the same measure of generosity, enjoyed it, and a jewel each. But I don't believe the attraction was Ruth Ford as much as it was her brother. Later, the Indians I knew, the Parsis, who paid for my trip to America the last time when I lost my passport and everything, had to come in as a visitor. They never came at all. They had 8 cabins and missed the boat. But the sister, who is alive and well, at one time married a Russian prince whose name I'll tell you in a minute. And that didn't last very long. But she had as a lover a boy whose name I think was Ten Eyck, and he went into the movies. And he married Ruth Ford the day after spending the night with my Indian lady friend. And the champagne was sent by the Indian brother. It was one of the only weddings which I refused to go to.
How did Chelychev influence you during those years?
Very much.
It was in Paris.
By introducing me to people, by criticizing my work, by instilling a certain effervescence.
Into your life?
Yeah.
And what was he like as a person?
Well, dominating and whimsical at the same time.
And in what way did he criticize your work that helped its evolvement?
Well, let me say more, he admired it than criticized it. That he might point out where it might be better.
And you were able then to accept that
I mean, he
criticism?
yeah, of course.
I can't
sought
imagine you
I sought
accepting
it.
anybody's criticism,
No,
Charles.
I knew he knew. He brought me Madame Lalonde, when she was still Madame Lalonde, Princess Paley, who married Jack Wilson, and I don't know if she's married or not anymore. I don't even know if she's alive, but she was the most beautiful person in the world at that time.
So,
And Lalonde had to pay the bill for the dress. And then Chelychev drew it later, and I sold the drawing to Harper's Bazaar.
he drew several of your dresses and on famous clients, did he
They
not?
were, no, not on one big double page. But it wasn't one of his best drawings.
And Kees van Dongen, didn't he also?
He didn't draw,
influence you?
he influenced me a great deal. I knew some of the women who posed for him.
And in what way did he influence you?
He summed up the essence of the 20s in which I began to develop.
In what way do you mean you began to develop in the 20s? You were coming to your own?
Coming to form an opinion of my own. But all opinions of one's own are based on a sort of salad bowl of opinions that you put together bit by bit. In the end, a person is a sum total of what they have admired.
Well put. And so another one person that you must have admired then, I think, was Christian Berard.
Very much. We didn't start as friends, we ended as friends.
You didn't start as friends?
No. He liked rich Americans and people who would toady to him, and I didn't. And finally he discovered that I really was for real, and that he liked best of all. You know, his mother's family owned a funeral business, and he was always very ashamed of this. And you find on the Paris telephone book the name, Borgnole, Société Anonyme. And he played at being poor. But he wasn't poor. Cocteau wasn't poor either. Very extravagant.
It must have been a fabulous salon of people in the 30s in Paris.
They were more active, and they weren't in the business of backstabbing.
Did you all meet and talk together? Would you?
Yeah, I lived in the same
to
hotel as
Pascal's?
Cocteau, down the same passage.
Did you talk often in the hall? Or?
Oh yes, we used to visit in each other's rooms.
Oh, really? Can you tell us a little about that?
No, I won't.
Well, what did you talk about? How, did you influence each other then? Did he influence you?
No, we
Your
used to
thinking?
lunch every day at the Rue Boissy-Douglas. I used to go back and buy the tablecloth on which he drew.
What did you do with him?
And he used to be drawing me all the time, but he said I was very difficult to draw because my profile had nothing to do with the front face.
Salvador Dali is another fine artist who you
yes.
said has influenced you over the
Great,
years.
and he's written a general release on my flexible sculpture, which I've never used.
We're going to read that a little later.
Yes, and he referred to my work as, particularly the white coat, as the first example in that he could remember of soft sculpture.
I remember when he did that. He also admired greatly a lot of your sculptures, some of which we've shown.
Yes, for the ones for jewelry.
How is he?
He's always been a very good friend.
And do you still see him now when he comes to New
I
York?
don't always call on him, and I can anytime I want, but I feel I have to tell him something,
What?
some good news.
Where did you first meet each other? Was it in Spain
And
or
Madame
Paris?
Bousquet.
In Paris, then.
Yeah. Now, do you know if Madame Bousquet is alive?
I really don't know, Charles.
She was the titular editor of Harper's Bazaar in Paris. But she must be well over 90, so I don't know what she's doing now.
Do you admire Salvador Dali's work? How do you feel about his
Some
work?
of it, very much. I don't think it's possible to say that you admire everything that somebody does.
I know that although you admired many artists, there are some whom you haven't really admired. And I think that one of the illustrative designer artists whom you, shall we say, abhor would be Erte.
Well, he would never have been known by any artist. No artist of rank would have even known his name. He was a designer for the Bas Boulevard, for the Folies Bergère or the Casino de Paris, all of which was something which didn't relate to life at all and particularly impressed the provinces.
Well, how is it that he's held in such esteem today? His work collected,
Because
passionately
the younger
admired.
generation simply doesn't know. The younger generation thinks that anything made in the art moderne period is good, regardless of the fact that most of what was made was commercial, from ashtrays to cheap hotel canopies and everything like that. It never ranked with Art Nouveau.
And the artists of the day shunned Erte, and
They wouldn't have known him. He wouldn't have ever gone to a salon. He was of a lower stature than Antoine, the hairdresser, who never went out either.
and yet he too is a famous name.
Yes, very famous and made a great contribution to hairdressing. But that wasn't considered a passport to the social world.
Was it?
And the social world in Paris includes the art world and music world.
And so Erte simply wasn't included.
No, he would have been considered the most decadent form of decorative art, of shit level.
Did you know him as a person?
I met him once at a cafe on the boulevard.
And do you remember anything about it?
Didn't like him at all.
Well, there have been a lot of fashion artists whom you've known and have been influenced by your work. Rien.
Drian.
Drian.
Was
Drian.
a great artist and a muralist.
Parisian.
Yes. Then Eric was the greatest of all.
And Antonio Lopez, someone who you
Yes.
know today,
Yes, that's true.
who I think has drawn a great many of your dresses for.
Yeah.
And that actually these drawings have been collected by several museums.
Yes, but he's given up that type of drawing to draw for porno books and do styling for cheap stores. And that's a criticism on society, not on Lopez.
How do
They
you mean
won't
that?
reward a man for doing his best work and will only reward him for doing bad work or work below his dignity. It's society that's at fault.
It's the whole sort of circle of the tyranny of amateurism,
Yes.
which is so much amidst us right now, isn't it?
Yeah. There was a very fine roster of artists employed by Vogue and Harper's Bazaar. London Vogue also, which had a different list of artists.
Bernard Boutet de Montville.
But his father was an artist too, and he was a portraitist as well as a fashion man, and drew very interestingly.
For the newspapers,
No, for Harper's Bazaar,
the fashion magazines.
no, only one magazine. In those days, great artists only worked for one magazine on longer contracts. For instance, a symbol of change is the fact that Eric once was commissioned to do an advertisement for chocolate, and he was paid $8,000. They didn't tell him what to do. They asked him. With Antonio Lopez, they wreck his work by telling him what to do. The art director today is the man who wrecks the artist's work. He's very insecure in his job, and he's never certain that anything is quite right, and he competes in a void.
Doesn't sound very stimulating to be an artist today. What would St. John have done? How would he have managed?
That was a woman, and she was a very good line artist who drew with a thick line. I don't know what she's done after a few years on the bazaar.
Margot Grenet.
Margot Grenet had a style quite different to anybody else's, and it always made an interesting page.
Was this in the 30s?
Yes, and the 20s.
Has the work of these artists become collected today? Is it considered fine art, or could you find it in museums? Paul Uribe.
The people who are mainly collected are the people who push themselves, like Erte, who didn't really belong and would like to belong, so they are still pushing.